What happens when a fearless politician steps onto a talk show stage only to be blindsided by a host with a venomous agenda? The air in the studio crackled with unease as Jasmine Crockett, a Congresswoman known for her fiery defense of working people, took her seat across from Stephen. The crowd buzzed, expecting a lively chat about her push for fair wages, a cause she had championed for years. But Stephen, with his trademark smirk, had other plans. His eyes gleamed with a sharpness that felt more like a predator than a host. The lights burned hot, the audience's cheers faded, and the stage became a battleground. Jasmine started strong, her voice steady as she spoke about workers struggling to pay bills while companies raked in billions. She leaned forward, hands clasped, her words cutting through the room. "People deserve a living wage, not scraps," she said, her tone firm but calm. The crowd clapped, some nodding in agreement. But Stephen's smile twisted, his fingers tapping the desk like he was waiting to pounce. He cut her off mid-sentence, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's a nice speech, Congresswoman, but let's talk about you. How do you sleep at night, pushing fair wages while your investments profit off sweatshops?" The accusation landed like a slap. The audience gasped, murmurs rippling through the seats. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but sharp. Stephen leaned back, smug, holding up a piece of paper he claimed was evidence. "I've got sources saying you've got money in companies that pay pennies to workers overseas. Care to explain that?" His tone was mocking, like he'd already won. The crowd shifted, some booing, others whispering. Jasmine's face burned with anger, but she didn't flinch. "You're throwing lies at me, Stephen, and you know it. I've never invested in anything like that. Show me that paper." Stephen waved the paper but didn't hand it over, chuckling as if she'd walked into a trap. "Oh, I don't need to show you. My researchers are top-notch. Maybe you should check your portfolio before preaching about fairness." The audience hissed, sensing the hostility. Jasmine's hands gripped the chair arms, her voice rising. "You're a coward, Stephen. You bring me on to talk policy, then sling mud without proof. Name your sources, or admit you're making it up." Her words were a blade, slicing through his smugness. The crowd roared, some cheering for her, others shouting at Stephen. But Stephen didn't back down. He leaned forward, his voice cold. "I don't need to name names. The truth hurts, doesn't it? You're just another politician playing the hero while cashing checks." Jasmine's eyes blazed, her breath quickening. She pointed at him, her voice booming. "You're a fraud, Stephen. You sit here, acting like you care about people, but you're just chasing ratings. Where's your proof? Where's your spine?" The studio erupted, cheers and boos clashing. Stephen's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He tossed the paper on the desk, shrugging. "Believe what you want, Congresswoman. The numbers don't lie." Jasmine stood, her chair scraping the floor. "You don't get to smear me and hide behind fake papers," she snapped. "I came here to talk about real issues, not your made-up gossip." The crowd was on its feet, the tension thick enough to choke on. Stephen's eyes flicked to the producer offstage, but he kept his cool, his voice taunting. "Running away already? Can't handle a little heat?" Jasmine froze, her fists clenched, her glare locked on him. She wasn't leaving yet, but the fight was far from over. She sat back down, her voice deadly calm. "You want heat, Stephen? Let's see how you handle mine." The studio lights glared down, casting sharp shadows as Jasmine Crockett sat rigid. Her eyes locked on Stephen. The crowd's cheers and boos swirled, a storm of noise feeding the tension. Stephen, sensing the moment, leaned closer, his voice oily with contempt. "You're good at dodging, Congresswoman, but you can't outrun your own record. Tell us, how many workers suffered for your bank account?" His words were a jab, meant to wound, and the audience gasped, some shouting in protest. Jasmine's face tightened, but her voice stayed steady, cutting like glass. "You're desperate, Stephen. You throw out lies hoping something sticks. I've spent years fighting for workers. What have you done? Besides sit there and sneer. The crowd roared, clapping for Jasmine, but Stephen didn't flinch. He tapped his desk, his grin sharp. Fighting for workers? That's rich, coming from someone who vacations in mansions while families scrape by. I hear you've got a nice beach house. Paid for with what, exactly? The accusation was vicious, personal, and the audience hushed, waiting for Jasmine's response. Her hands trembled with fury, but she leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. You're digging deep into fiction now. I grew up with nothing, Stephen. Every dime I have, I earned. You want to talk houses? Let's talk about your penthouse bought with your fake outrage. The crowd erupted, some chanting Jasmine's name. Stephen's eyes flashed, his cool slipping. He slammed his hand on the desk, his voice rising. Don't turn this on me. I'm not the one preaching fairness while profiting off misery. My team found records of your investments. You're no saint, Jasmine laughed, sharp and cold, cutting through his bluster. Records? You mean that paper you won't show? Let's see it, Stephen. Or are you scared it'll fall apart under a real look? She pointed at the desk, her voice booming. Put it out, or stop wasting everyone's time. Stephen hesitated, his fingers twitching toward the paper, but he pushed it aside, scoffing. I don't need to prove anything to you. The truth's out there, and people can see through your act. The audience booed, louder now, their support shifting to Jasmine. A man in the front row yelled, Show the paper, Colbert! Stephen's jaw clenched, his smirk gone. Jasmine seized the moment, standing again, her voice ringing clear. You're a bully, Stephen, picking fights with lies because you can't handle the truth. I came here to talk about real people, real struggles. You turned it into a circus. The crowd was on its feet, clapping wildly. But Stephen shot back, his voice venomous. A circus? You're the clown, pretending to care while you cash in. Sit down, or are you too weak to face me? Jasmine's eyes blazed, her breath quick. She stepped toward the edge of the stage, pointing at him. Weak? I'm stronger than you'll ever be. You want me to stay? Give me one reason not to walk. Out right now! The studio fell silent, every eye on her. Stephen leaned back, his voice mocking. Go ahead, run. Prove you can't handle it. Jasmine's fists clenched, her heart pounding. She glanced at the audience, their faces a mix of shock and support. She could leave, let Stephen think he'd won, but something burned inside her. She wasn't done. She turned back to him, her voice deadly calm. I'm not running, Stephen, but you're about to wish I had. The crowd cheered, the noise shaking the room. Stephen's eyes narrowed, his confidence cracking. He'd pushed too far, and Jasmine was ready to tear his lies apart. The studio pulsed with raw energy, the crowd's cheers still echoing as Jasmine Crockett stood firm, her gaze burning into Stephen. She'd thrown down the gauntlet, daring him to keep up his attack, and the air felt like it could ignite. Stephen, his face tight with irritation, snatched the paper from his desk, holding it up like a shield. You want proof, Congresswoman? Here's your truth, right in black and white. His voice was sharp, but a tremor betrayed his unease. Jasmine didn't blink. She stepped closer, her voice steady and piercing. Then read it, Stephen. Tell everyone what your so-called evidence says, or are you afraid it's nonsense? The audience leaned forward, their murmurs growing louder. Stephen's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to Jasmine, his smirk forced. It says you've got shares in companies tied to overseas factories, bad ones, the kind you claim to fight against. His words were rushed, vague, and the crowd sensed it, some booing softly. Jasmine's lips curled into a tight smile, her mind racing. She'd faced ambushes before, and she knew a weak lie when she heard one. That's it? No names, no dates, no specifics? You're crumbling, Stephen. That paper's as empty as your argument. The crowd roared, clapping and shouting her name. Stephen's face reddened, his voice rising to a snarl. Empty? I don't need specifics to know you're a fraud. My team checked every detail. But Jasmine was ready. She pointed at the paper, her voice booming over the noise. Then let's check it now. Hand it to your producer. Let's see if it holds up. Or are you scared I'll prove you wrong in front of everyone?" The audience erupted, some chanting, "Show it! Show it!" Stephen's hand froze, the paper trembling slightly. He shoved it back on the desk, his voice venomous. "I don't take orders from you. You're just stalling, dodging the truth." But Jasmine didn't back down. She turned to the audience, her voice clear and fierce. "He's got nothing, folks. He brought me here to smear me, and he can't even back it up. That's not a host. That's a coward." The crowd was on its feet, their cheers deafening. Stephen slammed his fist on the desk, his composure gone. "You don't get to lecture me. I run this show, not you." The stage felt like a powder keg. Jasmine stepped toward him, her voice low but deadly. "You run a circus, Stephen, not a show. You thought you could break me with lies, but I'm still standing. You're the one falling apart." The audience gasped, some shouting support, others stunned by the raw hostility. Stephen's eyes blazed, his voice a hiss. "Keep talking, Congresswoman. You're digging your own grave." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned closer, her words like a blade. "You dug this grave, Stephen, and I'm about to bury your lies in it," the producer signaled frantically from offstage. But Stephen ignored him, his voice rising to a shout. "You're done here. You think you can come on my show and make a fool of me?" Jasmine's eyes flashed, her voice matching his. "You made a fool of yourself the second you opened your mouth. I'm here for the truth, not your games." The crowd was wild, the noise shaking the studio. Jasmine turned, her foot inching toward the exit, her voice ringing. "You want me gone? Fine. But I'm not leaving until I shut this down." Stephen's face twisted, his next move uncertain, but the fight was spiraling out of control. The studio was a cauldron of noise, the crowd's chants and shouts fueling the standoff between Jasmine Crockett and Stephen. Jasmine stood at the edge of the stage, her eyes blazing, her voice still ringing from her last words. She hadn't walked off, not yet, but the threat hung heavy. Stephen, his face flushed with anger, gripped the edge of his desk, his voice a low growl. "You're pushing it, Congresswoman. Keep this up and you'll regret it." But Jasmine was done with his threats. She turned sharply, pointing to the producer hovering nervously off stage. "You, bring that paper out here. Let's end this lie right now." The crowd erupted, clapping and cheering, their energy a tidal wave. Stephen's eyes widened, his voice sharp. "You don't call the shots here. This is my show." But the producer, caught in Jasmine's glare, hesitated, then scurried forward, snatching the paper from the desk. Stephen lunged to grab it, but the producer was faster, holding it up under the stage lights. The audience leaned forward, breathless, as the producer's voice stammered over the microphone. "It's just a list, no company names, no dates, just notes." The studio exploded, boos raining down on Stephen. Jasmine's face lit with fierce triumph, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Notes? That's your evidence, Stephen? A scribbled page of nothing? You tried to ruin me with that?" The crowd was on its feet, shouting her name, some yelling "Liar!" at Stephen. His face twisted, his voice a desperate snarl. "This proves nothing. My team had real data. You're twisting this." But the audience wasn't buying it, their jeers growing louder. Jasmine stepped center stage, her voice clear and commanding. "You're the one twisting, Stephen. You brought me here to tear me down, but you've got no facts, no proof, just a sad little trick. You're finished." The crowd roared, their support a wall of sound. Stephen's hands shook, his voice rising to a shout. "Finished? You're the one who's done. You can't talk to me like this." But his words sounded hollow, drowned by the audience's fury. The producer, still holding the paper, backed away, his face pale. Jasmine turned to him, her voice firm but calm. "Read it out loud. Let everyone hear what Stephen's been hiding." The producer fumbled, his voice barely audible. "It just says investment claims and some numbers, no sources." The crowd's boos turned to laughter, the sound cutting Stephen deeper than any insult. He slammed his fist on the desk, his voice cracking. "This is a setup. You're all against me." Jasmine shook her head, her voice steady but fierce. "No, Stephen, you set yourself up. You thought you could bully me, but you picked the wrong fight. She faced the audience, her hands raised, her voice ringing. "This man tried to lie about me, about my work, my life. But I'm still here, and I'm not backing down." The crowd was wild, clapping, stomping, some wiping tears of pride. Stephen's eyes darted to the exit, his confidence shattered, but he stayed, his voice a weak hiss. "You'll pay for this, Congresswoman." Jasmine turned back to him, her voice like steel. "Pay? I've already won, Stephen. You're the one who's lost everything." The studio shook with the crowd's cheers, the air electric with her. Victory! Stephen slumped in his chair, his face a mask of defeat. But Jasmine wasn't done. She was ready to seal this moment, to make sure no one forgot who came out on top. The studio vibrated with the crowd's fervor, their cheers a thunderous wave crashing over the stage, where Jasmine Crockett stood tall. The exposed lie of Stephen's empty paper lay like rubble between them, his defeat plain in his slumped shoulders and tight-lipped scowl. Jasmine turned from him, facing the audience, her eyes alight with unshakable resolve. She raised her hands, silencing the noise, her voice clear and resonant. "Tonight you saw a man try to break me with lies. But I'm still standing because truth doesn't bend to bullies. I fight for workers, for families, for fairness, and no smug host can take that from me." The crowd leaped to their feet, clapping, shouting, some raising fists in solidarity. Jasmine's words carried weight, each one landing like a hammer. "I came here to talk about real struggles, real people who need a voice. Stephen wanted to fight, but he forgot who he was facing. I don't crumble. I rise." Her voice soared, filling the room, and the audience roared, their cheers shaking the walls. A woman in the back wiped tears, nodding fiercely, while others chanted, "Jasmine! Jasmine!" Stephen, his face pale, tried to claw back control. He leaned forward, his voice a weak snarl. "You're grandstanding, Congresswoman. This isn't your soapbox. You're just playing the victim to save face." The crowd booed, their voices drowning him out, but Jasmine didn't even glance his way. She kept her eyes on the audience, her voice steady. "Victim? No, Stephen, I'm a fighter. You tried to smear me, but you're the one exposed. Look, around. These people see you for what you are." The crowd's jeers grew louder, aimed squarely at him. Stephen's hand shook, his voice rising in a last desperate jab. "You think you've won? You're nothing but a loudmouth who got lucky." But his words fell flat, swallowed by the audience's laughter and shouts of, "Sit down!" Jasmine finally turned to him, her smile sharp and unyielding. "Lucky? I didn't need luck to beat you, Stephen. I needed truth, and you had none." The crowd erupted, their applause a tidal wave. Stephen's eyes darted to the producer, but no one came to his rescue. He was alone, his smugness buried under the weight of his failure. Jasmine stepped to the stage's edge, her voice ringing one final time. "I'm done here, but my fight goes on, for every worker, every family, every person who's been lied about or pushed down. I'll keep standing up. That's who I am." The audience was on its feet, clapping, cheering, some reaching out as if to touch her strength. She gave them a nod, her face glowing with pride, then turned toward the exit. Stephen shouted after her, his voice cracking, "Run away then! You're finished!" But no one listened. The crowd's roar swallowed his words. Jasmine walked off, her head high, her steps steady. The audience kept cheering, their voices following her through the curtains. Backstage, she heard the crowd still chanting her name, a sound that carried her forward. Stephen sat frozen at his desk, the lights dimming, the show in ruins. The audience didn't stop, their applause a testament to Jasmine's victory. She'd come to speak truth, faced a liar, and left a champion. The stage was hers, even in her absence, and no one would forget the night Jasmine Crockett turned a trap into triumph.